weeks, we are going to cut right into the action here because we are doing our second part looking at Dario Argento's films and some of the greats of Italian horror for our special October horror series. Yesterday we looked at the Stendhal Syndrome, and today Bennett's taken us into the caves to look at the Phantom of the Opera. We're going to get right into it, so we'll resume the episode right where we left off. So before we get into the Phantom of the Opera, I do want to take just a few quick minutes to talk about what makes Argento a great director, because we've kind of hinted on it, but he's made some absolute classics, and I think just because of the time period we're looking at, it's worthwhile to rewind. So this is an exciting matchup for me because, like we've all mentioned, it is kind of where he turns from classic to, a little more dismissible. So I just want to throw it your way, either of you first, whoever wants to go. What do you feel is Argento's strongest films, and maybe in what style do you feel he's at his best?
I mean, to me, it's always there's a scene in Inferno that is one of my favorite. It's a famous scene where the protagonist goes into the watery hole to retrieve a key. Yeah, so she climbs in this mysterious hole, and she tries to reach for it, and then she's got to go inside the hole underwater to find this key. And underwater is this whole other room, and it's got this kind of beautiful kind of Victorian decor, and then a body floats up and she's kind of stuck against this skeleton and everything. That ability of his to get so close, to get so in there, and to really create these movies where you're going inside something and pull us inside a space like that, and then put something in there where we really want to get out and we can't. He's very, very good at that. And, the whole structure of Deep Red is that it's about you're trying to go into that space and find that secret room where the murder happened, and it's behind this wall that's been plastered over. And he's very good in many examples of kind of going deep inside and then placing something horrifying there. And then my other favorite sort of murder in Argento is in Opera, when Daria Nicolodi gets shot through the eyeball in the keyhole. And it again, it's not that I like killing people or I hate eyeballs, but it's so uber visceral. Yeah. Getting inside the gun, showing the bullet coming out, blowing through the back of her head, hitting the phone that the kid in the background is trying to call help with, and blowing up the phone at the same point. It's so intensely, beautifully visceral, and yet so horrifying. It is, it is high art gore. And I don't know that anyone's better at doing this kind of high art gore that is such a beauty to watch and is so revolting at the same time. Yeah. And that tension between those two things is what kind of keeps me coming back for more.
So what do you think is his best film?
I don't know. I mean, I do think Suspiria is pretty great.
That's my pick.
I mean, I like Phenomenon, but I like that. I like Opera. Those three are kind of my favorites, probably. That's the thing. I think Bennett may have said earlier, they're kind of all uneven, though. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say any of them.
Even his best movies.
Yeah, I would never say any of them couldn't use some trimming or a little rewrite, or, he doesn't have a flawless film. I think it's the nature of the way he works, where he's sort of putting together these sort of scenes from nightmares and trying to wed them into something coherent. Mm. It's difficult to do.
Bennett, what about you?
I think my favorite of his films, two of the ones you talked about, honestly, Opera or Inferno would be the two favorite of mine. And what I like about him is that he works, like we talked about, in this grand, dreamlike, supernatural, otherworldly mode, but at the same time, there are oftentimes little details related to killings that are just achingly real world. The kill for me that sticks out is earlier in Opera when her boyfriend gets killed and he's getting like stabbed through the hand. He's getting these really like horrible defensive wounds that you're like, ugh, that's like worse than like seeing his eyeballs pop out to me. It's like seeing him get stabbed through like the palm. And Argento really knows when to do witch mode. You know, he knows when to have a coven of witches plotting around this like dance hall, and then he knows when to like, you know, have someone get like cut under the fingernail. He can play both of those equally well, and in his best films, he really knows when to do which.
I think one thing that's also important to mention, which we kind of skipped over in the last one because we were so focused on artwork, but he's one of the best musically inclined directors. I mean, obviously, Goblin. Like, what would he be without Goblin? They're just incredible. And I was fortunate enough to see Claudio Simonetti. They did a live score of Deep Red where they played at the Hollywood Theater while the movie was playing. And just hearing that in person, it's just like it took the movie to another level that was just absolutely mind-blowing. But in Stendhal Syndrome, it's important to mention that they hadn't worked together for 25 years, but Ennio Morricone actually did the score, and he approached Argento with this idea where it was going to be a score that could be played in forward or reverse with a repeating bass line that it just follows the same pattern. And things like that to me just stand out. And I will say Opera is not one of my favorites because I was in his heavy metal period, and I just think it's so strange because like that last scene where she's running, it feels like The Sound of Music, and you just have heavy metal.
Well, that's why I love that scene.
That's why I like it. Yeah,
it is it's like the nightmare Sound of Music.
I don't know. It just didn't work.
I like that he's been like. We talk about all of even his best films being uneven. He's a guy who's like only ever dealt in late style. Like I feel like from the beginning you kind of have to be bought on Argento. Like before Argento was a tradable commodity, you already sort of had to be bought in on all the ticks and stuff. Is what I really like about him. He really pulls no punches. It can result in some of the movies being too long. I've mentioned Cat of Nine Tails, even Stendhal Syndrome being one of those movies where you'd be like, ugh, might cut 15 minutes from this, but I don't know. It's better than someone not going for it, you know?
He's not shy.
The thing, I mean, I like him when he writes his stuff. I mean, he'll sometimes collaborate with someone. He collaborated with his wife, Daria, and he has collaborators. But when he does write his own stuff, he writes to his strengths, which are these set pieces, and so they are very much. I mean, they're auteur films, and they're very much his vision, and I respect that. I think of him kind of like De Palma, where De Palma has done stuff, directed films by Mamet and David Koepp But the ones he does that he writes are so tailored to his particular obsessions, and even though they might be a little clunkier, the character work might be bad, the dialogue might not be great, they're kind of more him, and that's the way I feel about Argento. He doesn't have that. I don't think he hasn't sort of collaborated with kind of A-list screenwriters in the same way. But all of his work is so tailored to what he does, and I really respect that. And I know I'm going to get something. I know I'm going to get something unique when I see one of his films.
So we're at the pivot point. I think the pivot point in his career. He goes from being pretty untouchable to. So between Stendhal Syndrome and Phantom of the Opera, an important thing in his life happened where he found out that his accountant was spending twice as much money as they were bringing in, and he went bankrupt. He lost his house and had trouble making movies for a bit, and so he wanted to return to the first thing that scared him, which was the Phantom of the Opera. This movie. I forget which version it was, but it opened his world to horror, and he said he realized he had a place in the world. But I really like this quote from his book because he's talking about as a kid and where horror fit into his life. And, he came from a very wealthy family. They had a large house. And he says, "For me, nightmares would begin at bedtime. I wasn't afraid of the dark like most children. No, I was afraid of the bedroom corridor. It was a perfect form of terror, pure and unconditional." And Jason Michaelich was going to join us today, but he had a family event come up and he couldn't make it. So I just wanted to return to something he said in his essay about the Three Mothers trilogy, because he talks about how Argento at his best, the horror is in the walls. Like, he just says everything in the frame could kill you. Like, there's just something in when it's scary, like, everything in the frame is out to get you, and that is where the key to his horrors come in. This is a movie that was shot in actual caves. It's shot in, I think it was a Budapest theater. There are so many opportunities to make the walls and just the environment absolutely terrifying. I don't think it works very well. I really don't think this film is scary, but Bennett, I'm throwing this your way because you're air booing me right now. Hey, you don't have to do that.
See, I think everything underground in this movie, it works like gangbusters.
Think so?
I think all of the cave stuff is incredible. I did not know that it was filmed in actual caves, but I think it comes across. I think the slightest gestures really work to disorient you incredibly when you're down in the caves in this movie. When two characters go down to look for the Phantom's hidden gold at one point, and there's a very simple shot of just the camera looking up in the air and sort of spinning around. It's almost a hacky effect, but it just beautifully communicates being turned around, disoriented in some sort of unfamiliar locale. I think the claustrophobia really comes across. Yeah, I don't know. This movie for me, in a good and a bad way, it feels like an episode of a TV show where they're putting on a play. It feels like the Hey Arnold episode where they do Romeo and Juliet, It makes me wish Argento did more literary adaptations, or that every filmmaker had to do something like this. And I didn't make this comparison in my head before, but it is almost like his Last of the Mohicans, in the sense that it's him readapting some silent film that meant a lot to him. Michael Mann talked in making that film about some 1926, I think, adaptation of Last of the Mohicans that he loved as a kid, and there's such a passion in this film. I just made it sound like sort of like an exercise, like people playing dress up, but at the same time, he's making a meal of this medium budget here. I talk all the time about eating at the trough. He's eating at the trough here.
Anyone who loves a movie, I have respect for. I love passion, and hats off to you for loving this this child. I find it a little bumpier, this movie, but in terms of what you're talking about, the corridor, which is an image he talks a lot about in interviews, because it's sort of the kind of childhood memory that sort of has the most direct relationship to his work. He does do a great job with that cave space. I mean, if anything, I also didn't know it was shot in a real cave, and I wonder if there were some limitations. I wonder if they had built something, if it would have had more kind of layers and dimensions. They do a lot in that movie with that one sort of narrow corridor in the cave where you've got things sticking out. They do a lot of the movie in this one sort of section, and I kind of wonder how big was this cave they were shooting in? Did they have other options? Could they get it at a different angle? But they do. That is a kind of terrifying. That is kind of an Argentoian corridor where they get the claustrophobia of that cave to work for the scene. I mean, I think the basic kills and scares, I think they all work in this movie. To me, the problem is it's a very romantic story, Phantom, and if you've noticed, there's no romance in his work. There may be people having sex or people in love, but there's no felt romance in his work, and I don't really feel it here. And Phantom of the Opera as a piece of work is a romance, and I could not connect with that section of it. But I did love. I mean, I love that in place of that, like and I don't want to jump ahead, but like he's got a scene where Julian Sands like is undoing his shirt and like kind of like doing erotic things with rats. You know,
Yeah.
I love that his substitute for like there's more heat between the rat and Julian Sands than there is between the main character and Julian Sands. But I sense you're going to disagree.
I will answer the question about romance in 1 second. I do think Down in the Cave, one of the things that's kind of a bummer about the movie is that it occasionally feels sort of rudimentary. He's not moving the camera like we know he can in this movie. It's especially a bummer in comparison to Opera, which is sort of riffing on Phantom of the Opera, as I think almost like anything set in an opera kind of naturally has to. Like that movie, like especially the opening scenes of both movies when you compare the two of them, like it's a bummer to see how just staid this is in comparison.
Yes.
But I think the almost like creakiness of like what he's able to do down in the caves really works in his favor. Julian Sands like chasing. I can't remember what her relation to the action is. The woman who goes down like looking for the gold with her boyfriend, but like when he's chasing her, it really is like Nosferatu chasing somebody. It really feels like that. And I think the sort of like creakiness works in its favor. I like too that when her like foot is stuck, the score just stops dead and then starts completely up at full volume right where it left off when she starts running again. Which I don't know is sort of like corny hokey effect that I think is befitting the sort of like EC Comics like Goosebumps nature of this whole thing. But on the subject of the romance, I think the one time when the romance really comes across is the rooftop scene, which seems like it's a sticking point.
Should we come back
I tweeted
to that?
out. Yeah, should we come back to that?
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Let me just set this up first. So there are many adaptations of Phantom of the Opera. This one, he does some different things. Bennett, do you kind of just walk us through some of the changes he makes, and especially about the Phantom and his whole deal in this?
Yeah, so the major change he makes, basically, Phantom of the Opera story is, right, there's a new opera house being opened, there's the soprano, who's like, there's like the head diva, and then there's her understudy, there's a guy who, like, lives secretly in the theater who starts, like, killing people because he wants the understudy to become the lead, and they fall in love. That's sort of basically the story. The major changes he makes in this one is that the Phantom is not scarred. He doesn't wear the famous mask. He's beautiful charisma vacuum Julian Sands in this movie. An actor, I was saying in the break, who has never been good in anything. He's actually in a Ken Russell film. Speaking of Ken Russell, he's in Ken Russell's Gothic. He plays Percy Bissy Shelley. Kind of a similar performance to this, where he just sort of does a lot of monologuing. If you've seen the film Benediction from this year, folks, he's actually quite good in that in like 2 scenes because the stiff upper lip thing sort of works in his favor. And the other major change here is that the Phantom was raised by rats and has a sexual identity sort of that's somewhat rat-like. You describe the rats writhing all over him.
You got to give one thing about Julian Sands. The first thing I noticed when he popped up on screen is I'd never noticed that he is slightly rat-like in appearance. His face.
He's got a big nose.
Yeah, big nose. Yeah.
Snout-like.
There's something shrew or rat-like in his face. Anyway, go on.
No, and it's otherwise sort of a straightforward take on the material. He adds some sort of comic relief characters who are sort of hunting for rats. One really underdeveloped strand is that the Phantom seems to have a telepathic control over people. He makes the one guy stick his hand in the mousetrap, and that's all we see of that, I think. Otherwise, we sort of maybe hear him like talking to people telepathically. One thing I think the movie does really well, and it's it makes sense to hear that it was sort of informed by childhood fears. Everyone in the movie is in this sort of childlike sense of terror about the idea of the Phantom. And again, I that to me perfectly it feeds into this sort of like playing dress up quality of the movie. It's like the biggest budget he would ever work on again, but it's like a notable step down from even like the Stendhal Syndrome, which is obviously like a cheaper looking movie than Suspiria, the real golden age stuff.
Yeah, I'm wondering about I sort of didn't know about that he had gone bankrupt. And,
I didn't either.
Yeah, and I do wonder. It does look cheaper. I actually looked up the cinematographer is a real famous guy. To me, it's also to my eye and my taste, it's overlit. Like it's quite bright, and I don't know. It's not like, I mean, they've got like a. I mean, this guy was like. I mean, he's DP'd major things. I think he was camera op on Barry Lyndon. I mean, this is like a heavy hitter that's working with him, and but there is a reduced and small quality to the film, especially when you compare it to, I mean, definitely Suspiria or any of those, but even Stendhal syndrome.
But don't all our day-to-day concerns seem small in the face of something like love?
Yes, they do.
Love of art, the love of cinema.
Yes, they do. They do, and its power to transform a measly budget into something profound. Yes.
I think my issue with this film is I found it hard to get absorbed into its world because it just kind of bounces you around at the beginning and it doesn't quite settle for a bit. So I want to throw this quote from his book at you. He says this about creating film worlds. During the course of my career, I've learned that if you manage to create a coherent universe in all its madness, you've already obtained the suspension of disbelief that's necessary to say whatever you want. The important thing is to make a solid impression on the viewer right from the start. I'm not going to rip you off. Trust me, and you'll see. You won't be sorry. So I think the question here is, do you think this film exists in a believable world?
No, but I don't mind. I don't miss the lack of exposition, I guess, in this movie. And again, I think part of it is me cutting him a little bit of slack because he's adapting well-known source material. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of taken as read, some of the premise and stuff, and we're kind of accepting it as just sort of Dario Argento playing around in a world that sort of already exists in the popular imagination. That said, I think I also cut him a lot of slack in general, and I cut a lot of horror filmmakers slack in general. Like, if we're accepting that there is a dreamlike quality to the film, then like building out a universe that is considered to be coherent, we're using this sort of dreamlike definition of coherent. So really, like, it just has to have a beginning, middle, and an end. Do you know what I mean? Like, all the walls don't necessarily have to connect in a way that totally makes sense. It could be kind of cobbled together from bits of different like buildings or different stories or whatever.
I mean, the part I have trouble with, it's not so much any of the most of the it's a simple story and all that stuff tracks fine. And it's more and I don't even have a problem with this. My favorite part is the rat subplot, that there's this rat catcher that's given this new role and makes like a rat catching vacuum machine that ends terribly. That's my favorite part of the movie. The moment that Christine first meets the Phantom and he seduces her and like strokes her and like practically puts his thumb in her mouth. Like, I couldn't buy that. I couldn't go along with that. This is something she would do, or she, and so the whole romance I couldn't feel, even though this story is something that scared him as a kid, and it has a lot of links to his work. I mean, it is about falling for a dark character and going underneath the art world, and I mean that's where he's lived, in doing high low art, going underneath the opera and hanging out with the Phantom. Like, it all makes sense that he would want to do this. I wonder if he ever really thought about the romantic, like doing romance. Like, I don't think that's in his skill set, and you want directors to push the boundaries. And I think I really loved Bennett, and I want to hear you talk about, they create the rooftop as this space, this artificial space that's done with, I don't know what, some crude green screen compositing. They make that the site of the romance. I mean, he does try to put it somewhere and make it through compositing, but I never felt, I couldn't invest in the romance, and that's hard for the story that is a romance. no matter how much blood and guts and decapitations you put in it. But I want to hear the defense, because I'm very interested. I was grinning ear to ear during the rooftop scenes, because I was like,
I was stomping my feet and pumping my fists.
I was like, this looks terrible.
I was weeping.
Yeah, and when the vision of if you haven't seen this, most people haven't seen this film. There's a vision at one point of this rat trap with these that comes floating in the sky, and it's got these like humanoid rat midget people trapped in it. And then there's a nude vision of Dario Argento, and
kind of looks like
Christine.
Venus.
Yeah, that looks kind of like Venus, and it all to me is in the style of a very crude composite like you'd see in Tim and Eric. And I was just like, what is going on here? But I want to hear the defense because I respect passion.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing there, it's a Paris that only exists in the imagination. It's a Paris that is distinctly cinematic. We're seeing sort of a crude, like early optical effect there. I think it's similar to, we talked a little bit about how the initial walking into a painting effect in Stendhal syndrome is that sort of crude CGI, which is also something like in opera where we see the brain. Later on in the film, we do kind of just see her zoom out of a painting, and I think that's similar to some of the sort of simple optical effects that a filmmaker like Terence Davies uses to incredible effects. And I think what it does here is, in a way that the scenes between Julia Sands and Aja can't, really puts us in the Phantom's sort of like romantic headspace. I think we're seeing like a child's idealized sort of cinematic vision of Paris there. There's something very like innocent and quaint about it. And then we're also sort of seeing that bifurcated vision. Here's like both sides of this character with this fantasy. Yeah, first he sees a bunch of like rat men stuck in a trap, and then he sees his love as like Venus. Here's the requisite comparison to Lynch. It sort of reminds me of the end of Wild at Heart when the good fairy shows up. So I don't know. I think a lot of filmmakers use similarly sort of consciously quaint looking effects, as a way of putting us in sort of like an innocent headspace, as a way of sort of like disarming us and like making us watch something from an almost like childish perspective again. And yeah, I don't know. I would honestly put this movie. I would mention this movie in the same conversation as a lot of films from like Lynch and Terence Davies that use similar effects to what he does on the rooftop here. The one film actually that uses really similar effects is an Dario Romero film that no one has seen, The Lady and the Duke, his French Revolution film. There are sequences. All of the exterior shots are like his characters walking against these like famous paintings. This sort of reminded me of that, and
there are tons of images of Paris. I mean, especially in the kind of 20s and silent era. I mean, and early talking era. Paris was, Maurice Chevalier. Like, there are lots of these images of a kind of fake Paris that were made in Hollywood. Seventh Heaven, the Borzage film, has a beautiful, backdrop of a kind of idealized Paris. The problem for me is just that it's not so much that the effects house botched anything or that it's artificial. I can't feel the love between them, and therefore all I'm looking at is the seams, And then there's the issue of sort of like juxtapose. I mean, it's sort of what I love about it is that it's just batshit crazy. Is juxtaposing like rat people trapped in a trap against, an idealized image of beauty. I mean, that's not your usual foreplay for, love, is that, these two images right next to each other. Usually that ends the date right there when you bring out the rat people. And that's what I love, is that he's just like his own sort of visual and horror obsessions just kind of keep erupting out of him because that's who he is, and they're grafted on top of this love story on top of a roof with what's supposed to be the romance of the film. And I find that really interesting. The thing was, at the very end of the film, when they are separating and she's going away in the boat and she started screaming for him I was like shocked. I was like, wait, she doesn't want to get away from him? And in none of the other versions of this story, I understand completely that it's a lot. This is the only version of the story I've ever seen where I'm like, get out of there. Get out of there, lady. She just, she just saw him like not fornicating, but like, having an erotic kind of rat cuddle pile. Like it was, I was sort of, it's the only time I haven't understood the basic emotional logic of this story.
Can I say the only other adaptation of this story I've seen is the Joel Schumacher musical adaptation from a few years ago. Jesus, it's like from 15 years ago. I'm really dating myself there. The one with Gerard Butler. Yeah, it's the only other adaptation I've seen, and I think they're kind of a piece. I don't know. Like, as cheap as this movie looks, I found myself thinking, like, God, they don't make them like they used to. I don't know. Nothing, like, I would kill for this green screen again versus, like, the green screen we're shooting movies against now.
Yeah, I mean, the Lon Chaney one is worth checking out. The Claude Rains ones, I think is kind of a bore. Yeah, but the Lon Chaney's worth a...
As far as that juxtaposition is concerned, I would say it's of a piece with, something like Stendhal Syndrome, which is about, the appreciation of art ultimately being something horrific. It's all wrestling with that sort of yin and yang of, like, barbarism and death and eroticism and love. And I think, given where the relationship ends up, with him... having some sort of, like, cuddle puddle with rats and then sort of, like, raping her, it ends kind of horrifically. So it's like... I don't know, it's in keeping with a guy for whom these wires are crossed in a really horrific, graphic sort of a way. And I find that to be a really, I don't know, like uniquely cinematic depiction of that. Yeah.
I guess I understand his wires crossed. I mean, I get like, he's kind of romantic, but he cuddles with rats and he did kind of force himself on me once.
Yeah, at the end.
I guess I don't understand her crossed wires because she seems like totally in love with him. And that kind of shocked me, though it hasn't in before because he's a much, he's more of a romantic.
Yeah, I don't know that it does a great job of psychologizing her fixation, but I do think there are a number of scenes that depict the just sort of like toxic obsession of their relationship that are pretty effective. I think when he makes her sing is really effective. On the short list of just great types of scenes, Guy wailing on an organ is like in the top 5. It just never fails, and I think that scene's incredible here. I don't know. I think it's helped too by just the inherent ridiculousness of opera. I'm glad to hear neither of you are like opera fans, and I'm sorry to all the opera fans among like Splitooth's listenership, but I don't know. Like it's just such a great setting for this sort of thing because there's so much like pomposity and like routine and like ceremony. That it's fun undercutting that. I love that the rooftop scene, like this romantic, like crazy reverie, is immediately followed by that shot down the main diva's like throat. Yeah. Really like selling like kind of what a like cockeyed sort of humorous take on his usual sort of slasher giallo material we're looking at here. Like that's like right out of a horror comedy, and this for me is as comedic as horror movies should get.
It's certainly, I mean, the opera setting, I was just going to say, the bigness of it, and the grandness of it, it does, to me, it flows with Julian Sands' performance and some of the hysteria of it, the rats, the rats performance. It's sort of, that all flowed fine for me. It's just when I was asked to care or understand why she might care for him. That's where I mean, I know that that's what the original source material, but this version didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it is weird to have the same sort of, because like, part of me wants to say like, well, we don't really care about the relationship dynamics in any other Dario Argento film, but at the same time, there's a different set of expectations when you're adapting this classic work of literature that's famously romantic. And
I would be fine going with a different version. I think he just could have gone further with it and turn it into something else. It's getting caught in the middle is always a problem.
I do find it interesting that you're both talking about lacking maybe some acting nuances, but he says he approached this from a different way than he normally did. He said normally his pre-planning with his scripts and everything was so intense that he wouldn't really talk to his actors at all about what they were supposed to do because he felt it was all in the script. But during Stendhal Syndrome, he and Ozzy would talk a lot about like what needed to happen in each scene, and he realized that it's kind of a good thing to talk with your actors and be collaborative with them and see what they feel they should be bringing to the scenes. So do you feel that collaborative energy came across at all, or do you feel the acting is the weakest portion?
No, he's obviously not an actor's director, I guess.
No.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate.
I think she's quite good in Stendhal Syndrome. I've seen Trauma, Stendhal Syndrome, and this. I haven't. Their other film is Dracula 3D. Stendhal Syndrome.
She's in Black Glasses as well.
Again.
She's in Dark Glasses.
Yeah.
Briefly, yeah.
This Stendhal Syndrome, I think she gives a great performance in that. She's a star. Like, I think she's great and does everything she needs to do. And it is I mean, it's, it's not, as they say, it's not Shakespeare, but, you have to believe that level of terror, that level of psychological distress, this sudden shift. I think that all works, really well. Again, I don't think she's as good in this. But I don't know, a movie's what makes a scene work is there are many elements. And it's not, I don't blame the actors. I don't think the solution for this working is better acting. I actually think Julian Sands is fine. He's totally creepy.
He's creepy.
Completely creepy. He's totally creepy. He's not. I think he's supposed to be. And his hair, he looks a little bit like a rat. He looks like he needs some conditioner. He's got long, stringy hair. Like, he's a horror Argento-y phantom. Like, I think he's fine. But it's when you're asking the audience to fall in love or understand why someone might fall for him, that's when it gets trickier.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think she's great in Stendhal Syndrome. Honestly, thinking of it, on the short list of better horror lead performances, I would say.
Yes.
This, I think she's fine.
Yeah.
I think she's up to the material. I just think it's tough when half of your performance is dubbed. It's half, although I guess
yes.
She's used to being dubbed, being in Italian movies, but it's tough when you're singing dubbed. There's a way of carrying yourself, just not that I know from opera performers, but it's clear that she's not singing. There's a very I'm not putting my chest into this to the singing that I don't know takes you out of it's de-immersive, which I think hurts the film a little bit, but a fine performance. I don't think she derails the film or anything. And I'm with you that I don't know that better acting would sell people who are not in on this film. I think as with every film I've ever picked for Split Picks, 10 minutes into this if it's for you or not.
Yeah.
Yes. You do find those ones, Ben.
Yeah.
You're good at that.
It's not boring, I'll say, and it moves along. I mean,
he has good films that are boring. And this
he has
never
good
boring.
films that are boring. And they're not long
that's
expositional passages like he's kind of known for. So it has that.
Frankly, this is one of the few films of his that I think could use an extra 10 minutes. I would have watched another one that scene personally.
We may not get a second on that.
We can agree to disagree because I think that second.
Well, I will say it could use some development if the goal is to make me fall in love.
Yeah.
It could use some development.
So I did like this. Argento, his film immersion, I guess would be a good word, began when he was a film critic. He was writing for an Italian paper, and reflecting on that era, he said, for me, bad films didn't exist. Every film had something to be savored about it, even if only 5 minutes or a frame or a soundtrack. I mean, pretty much anything you read about this film is that people will say it's a bad film. I mean, Bennett, you've given a few reasons why you think it's great, but I'm just curious what you think is what's your favorite moment from this film? Is it the rooftop?
It's the rooftop. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Does anything come close to that for you?
Oh, when he bites out her tongue, that's crazy.
He's
that's
a biter in this.
That's up there with any of the better kills in Argento's filmography. I think him hammering down the chandelier is an incredible sequence. And then, I said before, him making her sing while he plays the organ is an incredible depiction of this toxic, like obsessive relationship the two of them have, and I think is the closest the movie comes to really selling it. I do think, yeah, her desire to return to him at the end doesn't quite read. I think one more scene like that scene at the organ really would maybe sell you on that.
I mean, I would definitely 100% go with Rat Vacuum for my favorite scene. No question. I mean, when they started building that thing, I was like, no. And then when I saw it in action, I just had a grin on my face. I was just like, Rat Vacuum. He broke down the big ceiling, the glass ceiling for rat. What do you call that?
I have no idea. Rat vacuum killing machines. I love
yes.
Yeah. That sequence ends too so perfectly. It's like there's this sequence. It very briefly is like a sequence out of another movie. This sort of like goofy slapstick comedy of them like vacuuming rats and like suctioning them up into the guy's hand, and then they crash, and the one guy gets decapitated by a blade. It's just very immediately like you're right back in like giallo territory.
Yeah,
I think some of the kills in this are so goofy. Very early on, I think like 40 minutes in, you find out that like the first scenes were a year ago, and I've watched it 3 times. I don't think there's anything to suggest the passage of time. Perfect. That to me is like the apotheosis of this sort of dreamlike, you're waking up and it's like later and you're in a new place quality of his films. Like that to me is like picking up the ball that he put down when Asha wakes up in the car in Stendhal Syndrome. Like this is him taking a lot of his like fixations, the things that he does, and the things that are both frustrating and incredible about his filmmaking, and just, playing them at full volume. Folks, check out Phantom of the Opera. It's not streaming anywhere. I don't think. Actually, it might be on Tubi. Now that I say that, it's on Tubi. Is it not?
No, it's not. Oh. It's not streaming anywhere.
Yeah, I'll send you the MKV, everybody. Don't tell my internet service provider.
It's impossible to find. I do think you can. Yeah, you have to buy. I think you have to buy a imported DVD.
Worth every penny.
It's tough.
Folks, I'll send you a quote-unquote imported DVD.
That's not going to last long.
I was thinking during watching this that, because there are a lot of highlights, but you sort of see his obsessions grafted onto a story that it doesn't quite fit with. That's what I would say. And I agree. I mean, I loved the tongue coming out, loved anything with a rat, I thought was terrific. But, as I was going down there's kind of there are a lot of scenes where you're kind of going down the trip down to his underworld lair, and a spider will go by or a bat will go by, and you start to go, God, he's really leaning into his bats and animals and spiders and worms, and there's something a little like you've got all the trappings of your interests and the ways you make us squirm, but they're feeling a little naked out there. Compared to, the use of insects and like something like Phenomena.
But isn't that what Late Style's all about?
Yes,
you might as well be describing a film like Cry Macho, as far as I'm concerned.
yes. Not that bad, Cry
Great
Macho.
Film, as far as I'm
not his best. Not that bad, though. Modest, I would say.
So I've got 2 questions left for you guys. So to follow up on Argento's quote about having redeeming moments negating a film being bad, do you believe bad films do exist, even if they bring you some semblance of joy?
Oh, I mean, I share his optimistic view. I mean, that is the way I look at movies. I don't look at it like one strike and you're out. Mm-hmm. I look at it as, what can I get out of this movie? What pleasure might it have? And what idea about cinema might it have? What new inventive thing might it have? And then I look at it's a bonus if the whole thing adds up. But I watch a lot of we all watch imperfect movies, but I think real movie nuts, you love it so much, you're kind of interested in the things that aren't so successful, either. I mean, I spent last week watching movies about pilots because, and watched all the airport films, and then one film by Cliff Robertson about an alcoholic pilot, and then Flight, and then Sully, and these were Flight and Sully are all right, but these other ones were like, that airport series is like I mean, a real bottom of the barrel filmmaking. But you get one good suspense sequence, or one little treasure you can pull out of it, or one idea of how to do a good plane crash or how to film something, and I'm pleased as punch. So I share that philosophy about going to the movies. I hope when the lights go down and the movie comes up, I'm rooting for it, and I'll give it points when it does something interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Bennett.
Yeah, I'm generally.
I think I know your answer.
Yeah, no, I'm generally of the same mind. That there's really no such thing as a bad movie. I mean, for me, as long as a movie is directed, as long as there is like a point of view behind it, and as long as you're, in addition to getting a movie, getting something of a self-portrait of the person who directed it, then it is worthwhile. I think we have now a lot of movies that are very nakedly directed by committee. I think those don't have a lot to recommend them. I think those are bad in terms of like what they portend for this medium we all love so much. At the same time, like I'm not made of stone, Like I've given plenty of 2-star ratings, which for me reflects some level of affection to Marvel movies. It's occasionally there's some merit to just seeing like Spider-Man swing around or whatever. So yeah, I mean, well, I think there are movies that have a deleterious effect. I don't really think there's such a thing as a bad movie. I mean, there's ineffective movies, right? There's movies that don't do what they set out to do, or movies that aren't entertaining or whatever. But yeah, as long as there's a directorial intent behind it, there's something of interest.
To me, if it has something of interest and something that works, it's not a bad movie. It's not an entirely bad movie. If it's a movie that's trying to deceive, like a pretentious movie, I think sometimes that can be a bad movie. Because I think the one thing you're trying to do, right, is communicate with your audience. If you're trying to appear profound, I think this is deceitful, and I might categorize that as a bad movie.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of movies
or something that is trying to hurt the audience. Something that's trying to punish the audience, or in a way that is of no value to the audience. I'm not just talking about taking them through a painful experience. I might put that in bad, but those to me are worse than just an inept movie. I recently watched this movie. It's kind of has a little bit of a reputation, the Deathbed.
Oh yeah, wonderful movie.
The bed that eats. Yeah. This is a pretty crudely made film by a one and done director, who kind of cobbled it together with some money after college. But the thing has 3 good ideas in it. It wasn't that long, and it has a kind of camp enjoyment to it. I would not. I'm glad I saw it.
Yeah, sustains a mood, has some indelible images. I mean, I hate to trot out the infamous Howard Hawks quote, but what good movie is 3 good scenes, no bad ones.
Yeah.
And I don't know, something like Deathbed certainly fits that bill, I think.
So I just want to run through what he made after this, not in depth, but so after this he made Sleepless,
Good.
The Card Player,
Haven't seen it.
Mother of Tears,
Good.
and Giallo.
Haven't seen it.
Dracula 3D, and most recently Dark Glasses. He gets a pretty bad reputation for late period movies. I think in all of these there are moments to love. He will always have something in it, but I do think a lot of these are not good films. So I think I disagree with Argento in the sense that there is no bad films. I think there are bad films with good moments. That's my personal take, but what do you just briefly make of late Argento, his most recent films?
Well, I'll start and just say I have not seen Dark Glasses or Giallo. I've seen Mother of Tears. Being a fan of that series, I would say it has some good scenes in it. I did not love it. It has interesting stuff if you're interested in his his family drama. It's got his ex-wife, as a supernatural apparition kind of coming in and guiding their daughter who's in it. I mean, it has stuff that's interesting like that, but it was, to me, it felt like such a different universe from the first two films. I was disappointed. It felt like somebody really who had fallen down a notch in their ability, whether it's money or what. It's very hard to make movies when you're older, There were some interesting things in it and interesting scenes in it. But again, I haven't seen everything. Sleepless, I have seen, and I think that has it has a scare in it, just of a killer hunched over in his bed whispering, "I've killed so many people," and it frightened me so much hearing that. And it's not just that scene, but the whole build up towards that scene. And he's got some stuff that's firing on all cylinders in that film. So I will eventually get around to seeing these others. He's becoming less of a, I think because of his sinking reputation, they're not getting theatrical distribution here. It's getting a little harder to track him down, as we saw with, you can't even get Phantom of the Opera on streaming. I mean, we're kind of used to being able to get anything. I was like, what? Phantom of the Opera? I can't get it?
Yeah, I think it just got a Blu-ray release in June. I think he's maybe coming back around to getting a little bit more back in the spotlight, and maybe a reappraisal of the newer films is in order. What with the Film Society of Lincoln Center doing that full retrospective, releases like that Blu-ray release of Phantom of the Opera. At least I hope so, because for me, I think a lot of these newer films, they're not the intro that I would recommend for anybody. But if you exhaust the 10 or so undisputed classics, you really will find a lot to enjoy, at least in my opinion, in some of these other ones. I like Do You Like Hitchcock, which nobody likes.
I haven't seen that.
It's full of these very overt recreations of sequences from Hitchcock films, more shameless than anything De Palma ever would have imagined. Mm-hmm. De Palma first drafts. But I don't know. I found it very entertaining.
So I watched a documentary on giallo films last night, and one of the guys in it just said, I mean, if you think about it, Argento is essentially Paul McCartney. He made Suspiria. What else does he have to do? It's he does kind of have that he's basically a Beatle in Italian cinema. So I do think he's untouchable in so many ways that you do have to lend him some slack. So, should we make a pick? I mean, I am curious to see which one you're both going to take. Stendhal Syndrome versus Phantom of the Opera. Steve, you want to go first?
Oh, I would take Stendhal Syndrome.
Okay. By a landslide, or is it competitive?
By a landslide, I think.
Bennett, I
know
where you're going.
I'm going to take Phantom of the Opera, but it's close.
Okay.
Like I said, Stendhal Syndrome is definitely top 10 Argento for me. And that top 10 is way more interchangeable, I think, for me than for a lot of people. And I'll say Stendhal Syndrome, I'm so glad you picked this one. This is one that I would not have otherwise been rushing to watch. An esoteric choice that really rewards fans of Argento. I saw there's some list online where they ranked all of his films, and this they ranked last, which I thought was pretty wild.
Stendhal Syndrome?
Yeah, I feel like if you like
or
him
Phantom.
at all... Stendhal Syndrome. I feel like if you like him at all, Stendhal Syndrome's got to sit somewhere in the middle, right? It has so many of the hits.
Yeah, I think so. It may be just the brutality of it. I mean, it's that's a personal thing. If that may just override what you're willing to watch, and you just put it, And I've had that reaction to some movies in my life. I just there's also so much interesting in this film that when I do feel like something's really exploitative, I just didn't feel that in this thing, and that's what really turns me against a film. If I feel like there's real exploitation happening, I just didn't feel that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. I'm taking Stendhal Syndrome. I just watching it again, I was so impressed by how they do approach this just brutal material, because it is handled very well once you're able to get past some of the more uncomfortable aspects. But I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. Thank you both for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. I learned way more than I was expecting to, so this is awesome. It's what it's all about.
Well, great. Me too. And I'm actually probably I'm gonna finish off. I'm gonna watch Giallo. I have a copy of Giallo.
I think I might watch it tonight. Yeah.
I think I might watch Giallo tonight.
I still gotta see Sleepless. I'll do that first. But
Yeah, it's probably better. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, we've got more. We're gonna look at a few other Italian greats this month. There's a ton of great stuff going up on October Horror right now. Thank you for listening. Steve, Bennett, thank you for joining us.